Hey everybody, welcome back to class 9 of mdo204. In this class we're going to take our scene. I'm going to show you how to do a few more things with volumetrics. We're going to light and render it and then bring it into Nuke for final composite. So let's get to it. Alright, so one of the things that I wanted to show you before we jump into our final scene is a really cool way to use volumes across the mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out a flat plane as so, and I'm just going to hit spacebar to drop that, hit 3, select the polygon, and then shift D a few times to split this up into more geo. So, and actually one of the things I might do too is hit Alt 1 and toggle my grid work plane so it's a little easier to see, probably for you guys as well. So here we have a mesh, and I'm just going to name this mesh, let's say clouds. Whoops, clouds. And I'm going to turn that off for the time being. And I'm going to add item. I'm going to come down and add a volume item. And with my mouse over the properties, I'm just going to hit 0 to make that a little bit larger. And I'm going to up the radius here. And actually I'm going to hop over to the render tab so we can kind of see what's happening here. And with my mouse down here, I'm going to hit A to frame it up. So what I can do is add a noise, set this to volumetric density, and we can see it's the same thing we've done before. So from here, I basically just have to dial this in the way that I want it, using the same techniques. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just showing you guys this technique and what we're going to actually do with this here. So I'm going to come back to the model tab, and to bring back our items view, I can hit 0. And so I'm going to turn on my cloud layer. And then under volume, under the volume item right here, we have a particle geometry and particle source. So our particle geometry is going to be a sphere primitive, which is what by default it's set to. Our particle source we can put to clouds. And now all of a sudden you see that we have a whole bunch of these volumetric items attached to this mesh. So if we come back to the render tab, we can kind of see what's happening. So if I spin around like so and let this preview render happen a little bit, we can see that we have like a nice sheet of volumetric clouds from this one mesh item and one volume source. So I'm going to come back to the model tab, and the cool thing is this is all live. So actually I'm going to come over to Paint to show you this and just select my push. And now with this mesh item I can sculpt this and in real time change the position of these clouds or these volumetric items, whatever we wanted these to be. So if I hit Alt, if I hit Control, it'll push it in negative space and just kind of sculpt what we want. We can see that we have a nice little shape here. Come back to render, and we can see that these volumetric items are now have now been sculpted because we've sculpted this mesh item. And that's a really cool way to work and create changes and apply volumetric items to mesh sources. And it's all live, so if we come in here, come to perspective, if I wanted to, I could simply go into vert mode and come through and select verts and then delete them. And we'll do this a few times. And we're physically, if it's hard to see, I'll zoom in for you guys. We're physically just using our mouse, and I'm holding shift now and painting and selecting random verts and then deleting them. And that's just a way to break it up and give it some randomization here. So if we come back to the model tab, you can see that I'm kind of destroying our mesh item here, but basically the volume items are being generated at the vertices points of this model. So you can kind of see as we paint and select, we're selecting random vertices and then we're just deleting them. So it's still all live, and in fact in our render view we can pull up the sculpt window right here. You go back to push. If I right click and drag, we can change our brush size. And if we control right click and drag, we can control the fall off. So I can still gently left click and sculpt, or I can hold down control to push the opposite way. So we can see here that as I do this in this window, we can sculpt in near real time by just moving around this mesh item and using our sculpt tools to push and pull these volume shapes here. And if I'm not connecting with anything, I can simply right click to make my mouse bigger and pull those around. Make sure I'm getting in the right area that I want to sculpt. So it's a really powerful way to, really fast and powerful way to change up our geometry, and in doing so, creating the look and feel we want with our volumetric items here. So I just wanted to show you guys that, because that's what I did for my final scene, and I'm going to run you through that now to show you what I've done. Alright, so here we're in our final render file, and I just wanted to run you through a couple of things that I'm doing to make the images that we're going to be compositing in Nuke, and how to actually go through and optimize our renders. Optimizing renders, it could be its own unique career path. You could spend 3 or 4 courses on it actually, and it's very in-depth, but I'll just run you through some quick pointers on how to find fast results here. So if we look at this, I have my plane, I have the trails that are creating the trails from the wings, and I've just simply named them the volume trail, the particles trail sim, and the emitter trail emitter. But I also created a new group down here which I will name clouds. And in this clouds folder, I have a cloud mesh and a cloud volumetric item, which is exactly what I just showed you. So here we have the mesh item here. And actually this is, I've set this to wireframe mode because we are generating a lot of volumetric items. And I have sculpted these and painted them using the paint tools, and I've gone in and set it up so it's how we want it. So if I come over to animate, we can see that I have a nice camera move here. This might not play back recording, but basically we have a camera move that kind of sweeps down and does this little thing here, which is kind of cool. And I've gone ahead and rendered that out. So let me just show you what that looks like in motion. And here's our shot right here. And we can see there's a little bit of work that needs to be done, and we don't have a background. So we're going to run through a few things on how to do that in Nuke here in a second. I just wanted to show you what this animation looked like in motion. And it looks like I could have gone in and cleaned up a little bit of my rendering here, but I want to show you a few optimizations that I've done for the clouds here. So hopping over to the render tab, in our shading window, I'm going to click on render, and I've set this to 960 by 480, and the dots per inch is at 72. Under the settings here, anti-aliasing is at 8 samples per pixel. Environment shading, refinement shading are at 1 pixels. Keep in mind that the lower that these numbers go, the finer your render will be, but obviously subsequently the longer time it will take to render. Global illumination I've set pretty low. I've turned off irradiance caching and I'm just doing global illumination. I've set it to 1 bounce and indirect rays to 16. By default it's at 64. I just wanted to render this quick and overnight, so this is what I've set it to. One thing that also helped me is selecting my clouds and coming over to volume shading. And to get the clouds looking really good, I've set the render quality to very high on the sampling, and under shading set the shadow quality to very high, and then I set the sample rate to 0.5. Now this is the same deal with the smaller that this number goes, the higher quality it will be. By default this was set to 1, so I set this to half the value because I was getting quite a bit of edging and noise within my clouds here. The only other thing that I did was I gave myself a depth output, my shading normals, my object normals, my object coordinates, which are basically point position, and volumetric depth outputs. Now if you're going to do depth, you're going to want volumetric depth and regular depth. Volumetric depth is going to give you the depth for all of your volumetrics in the scene here. So I basically just rendered this as is. I did a few tests on a frame or two to optimize it, and I would recommend you guys do the same. Make sure that it's rendering as fast as possible and giving you a good result. Every scene and image is different, so it's definitely something that you want to spend at least an hour. You want to spend at least a good amount of time on the front end figuring that out, and you'll save yourself hours on the back end of wasted render time. So I would definitely recommend optimizing it before you kick off your own renders. So another thing that I want to do is I'm going to right click on this scene here and click export scene as, and I'm going to choose alembic format .abc, and I'm going to give this a name, alembic _ cache, and click save, and that basically saves out an alembic cache for us. You could also export OBJ, Collada, FBX, and a few other formats that you can to use as an interchange between software. So I think that's good. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to hop over into Nuke now and get started on this. So inside of Nuke, one of the things that I'm going to do, I'm just going to make this a little bit easier to see. I'm going to type in read geo and locate that file by clicking on this folder icon here, and just navigate to the ABC cache file and hit enter. And this little window that pops up will ask us about the different things that we want to import. And I don't need the trail sim. I don't even need the cloud mesh really. And it's not going to bring in the volumetrics, it's just going to bring in the mesh that has the cloud. But that's kind of heavy, so I'm going to uncheck that. I'll bring in the group locator here, which is basically our model airplane, and I definitely want the camera. Now you have two options down here. Create all-in-one will create a all-in-one read node for all the geometry, or create parent as separate nodes. I'm going to click on this, and we can see that I have my read geo and a camera, and if we double click on our camera, we can see that it has keyframes by the blue indicator here, and these change as the camera moves. So I'm going to read in a scene, hook the camera up to the scene, and then I'm going to hit tab. I'm going to hit tab and type in scanline render and hook that up. Now if I look through my scene node by selecting it and hitting 1, and then Alt middle mouse and zoom out, and if I hold Alt right click I can zoom around, and we can see my camera is moving. By the way, if you want to move around your 3D viewport, first you should know that you hit Tab to move in and out of your 3D viewport. If you're automatically looking through if you switch your input to a 3D scene, it will automatically jump to a 3D view. So here I'm looking through our image sequence. If I select scene and hit 1, it'll automatically jump to a 3D view, but you can always hit Tab to go in and out of it no matter what you're on. And up here I can click camera 1 to look through our camera 1, which in our 3D scene we don't have anything hooked up yet, so I'm just going to click default and hook up this Alembic cache right here. And that'll take a second. It's going to process everything and bring in our Alembic cache. So now we can see that our model is where it should be. And now if I click on default and go to camera 1, we can see if I scrub through the timeline here that it will update accordingly. Now this can get pretty heavy depending on how much geo you have in your scene and whatnot. I can always come over to my read geo and click on my scene graph and turn off and on things, which might help. And you can do those by clicking on the yellow icon here. And you might need to wait for it to update. The less poly geo you have inside of the 3D view, the better. So for now, I'm just going to unselect that and know that I do have my geo here if I need it. So with our camera set up now, I'm going to hit Tab and bring in a sphere and hook that up to our scene, and then under uniform scale set that to 1000, and nope, it needs to be bigger and even bigger than that. So I think that's good. We're inside of our sphere. If we look through our camera, we can see the sphere is surrounding us. And to check this, I'm going to just hook up a checkered board to the image here. And if I look through my scanline renderer and hit Tab to go back to 2D view, we can see the result here. And with my mouse over our node graph, I'm going to hit S and come to full size format and just change that to our render size. So this is going to be much better for what we want. So as we scrub through this, we can see it's changing. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Tab and bring in a constant. And under color, I'm going to control click this color wheel and set this to something like a blue sky here. And by selecting and clicking on it, I'm going to hold down Shift and Control on top of the checkerboard and then release, which is basically going to drag and drop it. So I'm going to look through just my constant now, and I'm going to set my constant to a square image here. Square 1K should be fine. And if we look through our scene again, it's putting this blue image around our sky dome here that we've kind of made. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it and hit ramp. type ramp, put a ramp in there, and if I look at this now, I can create a ramp against our constant, which is just going to give us some nice fall off. And if we see here and select, you can see these values changing as we hold control and click down our image, so we can see a nice gradation across here, and this is going to be what we want. If we hit merge with our render here selected, we can now merge this on top of our sky dome, which will give us this result. Now this might take a minute to cache, but if we play this back, now we have a nice sky in the background. And actually what we're going to want to do is dial this in a little bit more. The cool thing about Nuke is we could easily split horizontal and then create a new viewer. Drag that viewer over to this window here and hook that viewer up here. So now we can kind of work with a view of what the final output is and a view of this over here and how this changes as we move it. So with our ramp selected, we could set the color to something a little bit more orange. Might be a little bit more appropriate for the color here. And if we play that back, still think it needs a little bit of work. I could always change the color of our constant, bringing the value down a little bit. This is just a nice way to kind of dial this in. Maybe it's a little heavy on the gradient. I think that's getting a little bit closer to what I want. And it's a little bit rough. Could use a little bit of comp love, but I think we're going to save this for next week. And what I'll do is I'll show you some really cool tricks that you can use with some of these render passes as well next week. So I hope you guys are excited to take this shot to final and do some cool work on it all inside of Nuke. If you have any questions, please ask them in the forums. I'd love to see your work as well. If you guys have any of your own shots that you set up with any of the new techniques that you learn with applying volumes to a surface. And I'll see you guys next week. Take care. Bye-bye.